We're good. Okay. What I'm
think about you all through the day. My body, my body, your body cries so There's your voice, the touch of your hand. Just long to know that you understand. My body, my body, your body
Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the drums coming everywhere. So prepare and say a prayer, and when the word so well delivered will be over, we're coming over, and we won't be back till it's over there. Send the word,
Oh.
All right,
That was
take two. Did that do
fumble
it?
There we go. Let's see.
We got audio now. I just hope it's not.
I'm not hearing anything from the stream.
You got to give it about 30 seconds, I think.
Okay.
Audio input capture, desktop audio. Fucking OBS, man. Okay, I'm pretty sure I just heard my
Yes,
voice.
I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it.
Oh, there's a.
But
let's see.
it's sounding very echoey. Let me see if I can fix mine.
Okay, hold on. Now, just give it another 10-15 seconds for the delay to come through, and I'm hoping that did it.
Now it says that SVD can hear. SVD
Okay.
can hear now.
Okay. I think that's because of a little quirk of OBS that I neglected to deal with before transitioning to desktop view. But that's good because our first intro was a little shitty to begin with. But at any rate, I'm Jim Dewey. This is Combating the Narrative. Joining me today is Victor Saxon, not his real name, and B. Williams, I presume not his name as well. You know,
Correct.
The primary purpose of this stream is sort of to talk about how we came to be members of the alt-right or how we came to be red-pilled. So, I suppose, Victor, I don't know if you have any of, compelling information on your end that sort of was the thing that pushed you out of the cathedral into, a state of enlightenment.
I've asked myself this question before because it'd be a fun question to answer, to come up with some really, really good story about what was the turning point in my mind, but it usually just happens gradually. Now, in a rough proportion, what started it off for me was the fact that Ryan, or Alt-Type, was still on YouTube for the first half of 2020. Now, I know some of the more censorious types out there are like, I can't believe it. This is why we need to censor more, because the fact that these evil people were on YouTube in the first place is how the pipeline can stay open and all that. But I guess there's some truth to it. Where I first listened to the Making Sense podcast from Sam Harris, of all people, when he was talking with Charles Murray about the bell curve. And then some very, very wise chap put in the comment section of that YouTube video the very well-known Sean rebuttal of the bell curve, the ultimate debunking. It's like 3 hours long. And all the people that were talking about it were very, very sanctimonious and triumphant. So I was looking, are there any responses to Sean's rebuttal of the bell curve? And then that's how I found on YouTube our good friend Ryan Falk. And so the weird part about what I was before, because I was a pretty standard right-leaning classical liberal, very individualist sort of dude who was really big on the IDW and Jordan Peterson, and largely a Zionist, philo-Semite, you could say. So then it's kind of weird as to why I would keep listening to someone who's more avowedly alt-right like Ryan. Like, how does that even happen or work? And I guess you could just say I found him interesting as a content creator. And not to mention, he also provided something that I think kind of indicates a problem with those on the mainstream right, because it kind of plays into the innate autism of those that happen to be on the alt-right. Those who are very, very good content creators on the alt-right are like very thorough. They're very statistical. They're very quantitative, and they seem to do a more convincing job of rebutting shitlibs, just to put it bluntly. So when I got that sensation from Ryan, and it's worth pointing out that a few months beforehand I had found American Renaissance on YouTube too, and I was just watching the videos that Jared Taylor would have that could be basically interchangeable with right-wing content, because not all of what the alt-right talks about can be seen as racist or bigoted through a certain lens. But it just seemed like the alt-right was better at answering these kinds of questions than the mainstream right. And in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense as to why that is, because the mainstream normicon right is basically a subverted and nerfed ideology that only exists to give the illusion of debate and not give a satisfactory rebuttal to actual shit liberty. Like my favorite example of this is with Sean Last's approach on taking down the resume study, because anyone who's ever been on the internet ever knows that shitlibs from every corner of the globe will not stop talking about the resume study, about how a black person's got to send 15 more resumes compared to a white person who only needs to send 10 resumes to get a callback or whatever. And so you got Sean Last who responded to that, and I think you got Ben Shapiro who had in a segment of one of his videos tackling the study. And like Sean Last, probably because he is Sean Last, just absolutely went for the jugular on that study and other studies like that, just comprehensively and statistically showing why the study is stupid. And then you take your NormieCon Daily Wire content from our friend Shapiro, and it just doesn't even compare. And so it's not like I decided to wake up one morning and say, I'm going to be all right. I'm going to be a racist now. I'm going to be an anti-Semite. I decided I want to be marginalized in the public space because I think it's fun. That didn't happen. What happened is that the alt-right seemed to be better at comprehensively answering certain questions. And then it's important to remember I didn't start believing in the JQ in any proportion until January 2022. So it's kind of funny to think about how I was on the alt-right but not believing in the JQ for a certain period of time, but that's how it was. And the reason that I can't go back, in a sense, is that the JQ just provides answers for things that don't make sense unless you consider the Semitic element to them. Now, I know that some representative of the ADL is probably listening into this secretly right now on an incognito tab, so I'll just kind of keep it like that. But again, I didn't decide in January 2022, it's like, oh, here's this Culture of Critique book. I'm going to be an anti-Semite now. I did it because it has too much explanatory power to just dismiss as bigoted and ignore, which I think is something those on the NormieCon right just do way too often. So I can't really come up with much in terms of particular inflection points, but that's kind of the gradual story of how I think that, not because I decided to be racist, because I was one of those people who, along with the left, I was very condemning of identity politics. I was against white identity politics and any kind of identity politics, because that's what those on the IDW never shut up about. So I wasn't like that at all. I considered the alt-right an adversarial force in some way because they were a bad guy. But then naturally, it turns out when you get your view of a certain group of people from those that aren't a part of that group of people, you don't get a very accurate view of them. So when you start actually listening to people on the alt-right, you understand that the terms like white supremacist and white nationalist are conflated terms. I think they don't mean the same thing. So, but yeah, I think I've. Oh, what are you saying?
Go ahead.
No, I was about to say that I'm done. So
yeah, and I think that's a pretty common story for most of us on the alt-right. Where, I mean, like you, I started as a true believer in really the West, in America in particular, right? I was very right-wing, but I was never one to, venture beyond the bounds of what is socially acceptable, right? So I was that conservative that's, just 15, 20 years behind the curve in that respect. I suppose I started to turn when I actually became introduced to, and that's how I found people like Sean Last, people like Ryan Falk, people like Devin Stack, who were really instrumental in, converting me, if you want to frame it in a sort of religiosity. Because,
opening your mind.
Well, there was just no refutation for what they were saying. Like, there was a lot of straw manning and ad hominem and, hurling about of the term racist and bigot, but there was never anything that could concrete that hard data. And so by the time I was an adult, right, or sort of entering college, let's call it, I was pretty well on the alt-right, but I was still one who truly believed in the system and believed that, yes, it's corrupt, but there's something here that's left to save. And I truly believed that, even though, let's say I acknowledge that the mean IQ of black people is at 85, that doesn't mean, the system is broken because we're pushing diversity. Like, I hadn't made that leap of logic yet. But I was becoming increasingly disillusioned. So I've been hesitant to talk about this on stream just because, much like, Victor, I'm not looking to get myself doxxed because our opponents on the other side of the aisle are, they're out for blood. They're out to go to your employer. They're out to go to your school. They're out to find you where you live. And interestingly enough, perhaps a topic for another time, that's not something we ever really see on the right side of the aisle. Nobody's ever going out and trying to kill communists. But in any case, I think it's worth mentioning because I've got a unique insight that most people don't have, right? So I actually, for a period of time, while I was in the Army, I did secure an appointment to West Point. And I spent a considerable amount of time, I'm not going to say how long, I'm not going to say what graduating class, at West Point. And to me, to backtrack, from the time I was a little kid, that was what I wanted to do. I was a person who very much not only idealized the United States, but idealized the Army, idealized the idea of being an officer, and idealized, the American fighting men who had, fought in every war I cared about. And the unique trait that these men all possessed was that they came from West Point. And so naturally, aspiring to be a fighting man myself, I did everything I could to go to West Point. I had this very high ideal. The academy was on a pedestal. Everything else can be shit. And I was concretely aware that most institutions were corrupted, but this institution has to be beyond touching. And when I got there, I was sorely disappointed with the degree to which the rot had spread. And sort of to back up what I'm saying here as I'm talking, I'll sort of pull up and read from some of these different articles. But my first experience going through West Point was cadet basic training, beast barracks as they call it. And, I went through the whole rigmarole. They shaved my head. I reported to the cadet in the red sash and all that nonsense. And, I was ready to start. And mind you, this was not my first foray into the military. I knew a thing or two by this point in time. But I was ready to learn. And I truly believed that I was going to be the least of these, so to speak, that truly these men must be a cut above me, and I'm here to shut up and, learn to the best of my ability. And, I'll just be happy to graduate with these people. But it was not so. As I'm going through basic training, it's very clear that shitlibbery has pervaded the academy. I'm hesitant to get into too much detail or drop names or things like that, but there were people there who were, about ready to graduate or in very high positions at the academy that were conflating and confusing very simple terms. For instance, there was a large degree of confusion as we were, talking about small unit tactics, individual movement techniques between cover and concealment. And these people who were supposed to be a cut above the rest, for those of you who don't know, cover is something you can't shoot through, concealment is something you can.
Okay.
But these people didn't know, and that's something that's like small unit tactics 101. These people didn't know. They were conflating it, and they were arguing between each other. What's more is they were very, very unprofessional. As soon as we were out of the room, the facade would drop. During basic training, it was very clear they didn't care. They held nobody to any sort of standard, and they would run their mouth about how they just couldn't wait for that detail to be over, and they were there primarily to do a couple of things I'll talk about later. But so already the well is poisoned, right? And as I'm going along, I'm hearing instructors claim these pants-on-head retarded things, like something that completely undermines the credibility of the whole institution. For instance, there was an instructor at the academy who accused Douglas MacArthur of having committed genocide in Vietnam. Now, for those of you who don't know, Douglas MacArthur was not even alive towards the tail end of the Vietnam War, and he certainly wasn't leading men. And the idea that the United States had perpetrated a genocide in Vietnam is, again, ridiculous on its face. I mean, I think it's a testament to the fighting prowess of the United States Army that they BTFO'd a country so hard they have to whine and call it a genocide. But that gives insight to what these people are like. They're not, a bunch of young Pattons running around being instructed by, the greats of a previous generation. No, this is the greatest middle and upper class welfare scheme known to man. And part of that stems from the way the admissions process works, right? So just to pull up for you guys here, they break down in order to become admitted to any service academy, you've got to secure a congressional nomination or get nominated some other way. So for instance, if your parent was killed in action, they have an unlimited number of spots open for you, provided you're minimally qualified based on their criteria. But they've got, in each little recruiting command, they've got diversity advisors. Let's see if we can pull them up here. Diversity outreach officers. And these are people who pull the bottom of the barrel, minimally qualified people. These are people who on the ACT have like a 23. And they're being pulled into the finest military institution there ever was. And I distinctly recollect part of when I sort of came to the realization that this diversity recruiting process had so fucked the academy like it had fucked everything else was I remember standing in line. I don't recall exactly what we were doing. We were probably getting issued some gear or drawing rifles or something like that. And, everybody, as you're wont to do when you're in a training environment like that, was, at the position of attention, thumbs on seams of trousers, stare at the guy's back, the back of the guy's head in front of you. And there was this black girl who was maybe 5 or 6 people in front of me from a different company. Never found out who this person was. And she sees one of these diversity outreach officers walking down the hallway. And she had clearly had some sort of previous interactions with this diversity outreach officer, right? Like they were on a first name basis, which is completely beyond the pale to any of you who aren't in a military environment. You don't. Certainly when you're a new cadet going through cadet basic training, you're the lowest of the low, you're dirt. You certainly don't refer to an officer by their first name, which is what happened. She stepped out of line, referred to this officer by their first name, who also was black, and started chomping her gums and trying to shoot the shit with this officer in this training environment who, and the reaction here was just ridiculous. It was like this girl just got gently chided and told to go back into formation. So that's all that happened. I mean, and you got to understand too that because women were incorporated into the Corps of Cadets, everything was nerfed. I don't recall the exact number because it's been some time now, but the most corrective training you could be administered at any one given time, at least when I went through, was 20 repetitions of any individual exercise. A lot of times it was push-ups, but sometimes it'd be things like the Y squat or the 8 count push or whatever. They had a whole bunch of different stuff. But it was always a joke, and it was never really used to enforce any real degree of discipline because they couldn't maintain the standard on an equal level with men and women. And that was another thing, too, that I just saw the rot at this academy, because this was the first time in my military career that I had been in close contact. I was aware of women in the military, and certainly I had some, interactions with them, but it was never in any sort of actual field training environment. Never, ever did I go on a ruck march with them, which is, again, not to keep bringing up this cadet basic training, but again, one of the pivotal things that I saw was, I'll never forget this as long as I live. We didn't even have a rucksack on. It was called an assault pack, and we had a couple different items in there. It was nothing heavy. It was nothing approaching the weight of a rucksack. This was probably 25 pounds of equipment tops. And we were marching in formation, and, our platoon sergeant gave the order, double time. So we all started a brisk jog up this hill with kit on. And all the females in my company, and a company is a lot of people. There's 4 platoons. I could see, I was in the 3rd platoon, and I could see the people in front, and I could see
That's in the hundreds, right? That's
What's up?
A few hundred people.
About 200,
Yeah,
right?
in that environment, it was probably closer to 150, but
Okay.
in the big army, you're looking at, depending on staffing, like 90 to 120 people. But in any case, these women, I mean, this is like minimal physical exercise. And we were supposed to be physically fit, you know, to a cut above our peers. We were supposed to be the best of the best. And I'll never forget all the women falling out as we're going on a brisk jog up a hill. And one girl in my squad started crying, sobbing, inconsolably sobbing. And she
Like
falls
stereotypically?
out. What's up?
Like stereotypically sobbing?
Yes.
Like crying like a girl?
Yes, part of
Jeez.
it. Part of it was obviously she was winded, so I'm sure that compounded the whole crying thing. But you
Sure.
know, that was my battle buddy, so I fell out too because I was, you know, the pace was such that I was confident I could catch up. And of course, one of the members of our cadre was there as well, and I was instructed to take her assault pack and carry it for her.
Very chivalrous.
Very chivalrous, very chivalrous. So, but women are equal. It's just I happen to be in that instance more equal than her. So,
Yes.
and you know, I could sit here and prattle on all night with 100 different examples of what I personally witnessed. But suffice to say that, you know, there's a saying at the academy, you know, the Corps has gone to hell in a handbasket, and in the past, that's just been old heads talking about how much more difficult they had it, but now the Corps truly has. And really, that, obviously I went through a similar, you know, set of circumstances as you, Victor, where I'm coming into contact already with, you know, being a right-leaning person, coming into contact with conflicting information from what I truly believed that could not be refuted. So I'm not really one to talk about the JQ on YouTube, but, you know, obviously things with the IQ and criminality of traditionally understood, you know, minorities in that sense. But when I came to the conclusion that West Point was just as corrupt, that was the point where I said to myself, you know, like, this is beyond saving. Like, it's almost when you, like, if you ever, out by me, there's a ton of, like, dilapidated old farm buildings, because I live out in the middle of nowhere, and some of these buildings you look at and you're like, okay, you know, slap a new coat of paint on there, maybe a new roof, like, you can have a pretty functional barn. And that's, you know, prior to my experience at West Point, sort of my view of the United States and the West in general. But other buildings around here, I mean, they're just held up by hopes, dreams, and prayers. Like a stiff breeze will knock this building down. There's no salvaging. The rot has spread too far. And I suppose that adopting that frame of mind has really shaped my political views from that point in time, and has really turned me into somebody who was eager to be sort of a jackbooted representative of American imperialism, ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the enemies of the United States in close combat across the the globe, to somebody who truly, truly hates the powers that be. And it's not just me, right? You have to go through the admissions process in order to get into West Point, which in and of itself, you know, obviously there's only so far that you can really fuck an institution with a couple of diversity outreach officers, especially when, at least ostensibly, there is some sort of quantifiable criteria that dictates whether or not you get in. Now, there were instances in which the standard was lowered for people who you know, met a certain demographic they wanted, for instance, you know, women, blacks, Hispanics, but also those who could play sports ball real good. They were held to a different academic standard. But you have to understand, too, that by virtue of the fact that the vast majority of us who were appointed there required a congressional nomination, we need to consider that for a moment. We need to consider who gets to go to the world's finest military institution is decided by members of Congress who over half of which at this point in time are just shit libs, the other half of whom are boomer cons. So,
Yeah.
and political corruption is a thing as well. You have to understand that by and large, or not by and large, but in a lot of instances, this is used as a way to return political favors. There were a lot of people at the academy who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. I really didn't fit that bill, coming from certainly a lower middle class family. So, and to just give you insight as to how far, we have fallen. I mean, here's some diversity outreach going on. Oh, we've got Indians in a headdress and all that stuff. But I'm sure you guys remember from a few years ago, this guy, his name is Stephen Rapone. He's got, he's taking a picture in his uniform in front of, I think that's Washington Hall there, but I can't really tell, in his cap with a sign that says communism will win. These are the types of people that get appointed. And really, I got to see government pork firsthand as well. So they had, at the time I was there, very recently completed Benjamin O. Davis Barracks. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, who in the hell is Benjamin O. Davis? And I, as a student of history, had no idea until I got there, and he was, I think the story is, he was the first black Air Force officer, but he was a West Point grad just by virtue of the fact the Air Force didn't exist until after he had graduated. But I mean, this was probably the biggest instance of government pork I have ever seen. This was a brand new building where nothing was fucking functional. Like, not at all. You can see out front here, this stuff was where from time to time cadets would form up, and these pads here, this concrete is heated. The reason being, it gets snowy up there. It's easier to form up where there's no snow. This was meant to melt all the snow. Well, there was no proper drainage, so what happens is it'll just fucking flood. The snow will melt, it'll flood. Nobody ever bothered to fix it. The AC system was completely fucked. It just did not work. Things like that. And I'm trying not to prattle on too terribly long, but... And it's not just me that's observing this, because I'm just one guy giving anecdotal evidence. There's...
I'm sure there are some blogs out there dedicated to tracking this stuff.
I'd hope so.
Yeah, I mean, one would think, but, there weren't a whole... And people like me, I wasn't the only person like me there. Like, there were some good people there, but they were few and far between. But, I mean, there are... Every now and again, something like this will pop up from, former instructors or former graduates talking about, how the honor code, a cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do, is being, selectively enforced. Corruption of cadet instruction with socialist doctrine. The academy staff requiring cadets to violate religious beliefs contrary to the religious freedom long observed by the academy. I think they're talking about the vaccine mandates there, but that was sort of after my time. Critical race theory, that was actually really the first time in my life I had come into contact with such a thing at the academy. They were pioneers of this stuff. And, they want to talk about socialist revolution. That was commonplace there. They're big lefties up at the academy. Wokeness, critical race theory. And if I were to espouse any of the views I've espoused on my channel so far, in the big army today, there is no way I would still remain in the army. I would be discharged and given a code on my DD-214 that says I can never come back. But this was also one of the things, too, that really ground my gears, and it's 40 pages long because West Point cadets are self-fillating. But essentially, the key takeaways here are that West Point is systemically racist. That's just not true. They need to have anti-racism, or how white people are bad, as part of the curriculum at West Point. It already was. And conditions for an anti-racist space are not present at West Point. So conditions for an anti-white space or a white-free space. And they detail at some length exactly what they want, these crazy things that they want to do. They want, individual white leaders at the academy to talk about how their white privilege is the only reason they've been successful and how white people suck. There's something in the Army called EO, or Equal Opportunity Claims, and this is usually tied in with something called SHARP, Sexual Harassment, Assault, Response and Prevention, if my memory isn't failing me. But essentially, somebody can level an allegation that you did a racism or that you did a sexual assault, and you get hauled in front of a kangaroo court. A tribunal is convened, and, there's no real administration of justice. But clearly they want more command climate surveys, anti-racist education. And I could go on and on through this document, and indeed it might be, interesting to do so at a later date. Black Manifesto was written by black cadets in 1971, so this is nothing new either. But this is all culminated in the Army's recent move to start tearing down Confederate statues and start renaming buildings. So even when I was there was a big push to rename Robert E. Lee's barracks. They're renaming a bunch of different Army installations. For instance, Fort Benning is getting renamed. They want to start tearing down even the statue of Patton and the statue of Douglas MacArthur up at West Point. So, and this is not just going on at West Point, it's going on at the Naval Academy as well. And just across the board in the United States. We've finally reached that point where no longer can we admire qualities in people who prior to the Civil War were Americans and after the Civil War were again Americans, some of whom even offered their sword in the fight against the Spanish in 1898. But, yeah, white people bad is now the battle cry of the Department of Defense, so... And they made a big deal about, the Ku Klux Klan. There is on some mural, there's a little... It was a mural about U.S. history, and so obviously they incorporated, probably because of some degree of shit libery at the time, a little aspect or a little portion of this mural about the Ku Klux Klan. So there's just a hooded figure representing the Ku Klux Klan on one of the murals at West Point because it's a part of U.S. history. So, but I know that was a little rambly, and that was in part because I realized if I talked about everything I wanted to talk about, this would be a 2-hour schizo rant. But with that, I don't know if you have anything you would like to contribute, B. Williams.
I do.
Yeah.
Before, I just want to interrupt B. Williams for a second.
Go ahead.
Just to describe what you were saying, Jim Dewey, there's that Christopher Hitchens quote from 2007 that isn't related to the same thing, but the quote itself is very, very potent, where he says, you see how far the termites have spread and how long and well they've dined. That's how far the termites have got. And I think that just really painfully summarizes everything you've said.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I want to add is that
again, the Marxist guy, Rapone, he did get kicked out of the Army. I don't want to give the impression that somehow even the Army was so soy-pilled that they allowed him to stay, but that was only after tons of backlash, and the guy had already commissioned at the time. People were calling for his head. The old grads were calling for his scalp, so they were kind of in a bind. But yeah, U.S. military history says Fort Bragg, Fort Benning, Fort Lee, Fort Polk, Fort A.P. Hill, Fort Pickett, Fort Hood, Fort Rucker will all be renamed. Yeah, you're right. And I suppose I should have seen that coming, but I was surprised that it happened so soon just because there is, on the Boomer Con right, still a lot of resistance to doing that. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to add, with the military being paused and all that, which is that, only the Marines at this point are, not too paused.
That's just
but voting data from... voting data from in terms of their officer stuff, yeah, but voting data from the 2020 election found that while the military, on the whole, like voted only 28% for Trump, which is just think about that statistic. Only 28% of the entire military voted for Trump in the 2020 election. That's insane as well. The Marines did vote majority for Trump, but yeah, their officer corps is fucked as well. I'm just referring to like the average sort of voting stuff, but it's nuts. The military has gotten to this point, and I think actually, Jim, you raised a very good sort of problem with boomercons and normicons and all that is like that they're too self-assured. That things that they'll get to control certain institutions, like, oh, we'll keep the army, we'll keep the police, and if things go bad, we have our Second Amendment. It's like, no, you don't.
No, and that was my point, not to rehash my video on the Civil War completely, but that was my point, is like, you don't control these institutions and you think you do. Like, the army is increasingly diverse, and we know that, voting patterns correlate very strongly with race. And really, the left versus right dichotomy at this point in time in the United States, whether or not the boomercons on the right want to admit it, is the white versus brown dichotomy. Just because humans
we could just change their minds. We just need to change their minds and make them all individualists.
Yeah, if only we talked to them about how great Robert E. Lee was, that maybe they just don't understand. But yeah, and I wanted to bring this up too, like, West Point cadets are fucking degenerates, dude. Like, this is, like, drug use is not uncommon. I wanted to bring up, too, that very recently on spring break last year that 6 of them OD'd on fentanyl and coke. So.
I mean, like, yeah, it's ridiculous.
That's good.
I know when it comes to, like, women in the military, they're all basically just sluts.
Oh, really? That's
plain and simple, yeah.
Strange.
That's how Caveman was describing it, because Caveman used to be Caveman is a friend of Victor and I. Yeah, he used to be in the Marines, and the way he described it was like all the women Marines were just sluts. Which is another problem with the woman in the military.
Well, and a lot of times it's hard how they survive, because there's a certain...
Oh, I see.
Like, it's like I said in one of my previous videos, too. Fighting, even in the modern day, is an athletic endeavor. And even though the Army has gotten away... Like, what I anticipated when I got to West Point, right, was from a book I had read on small unit leadership, written by a West Point grad, probably 60-some-odd years ago, talked about the golden rule, about how you should be doing one of two things at any given point in the Army. You should be fighting and winning wars, or training to fight and win wars. Even though we've gotten away from that, there still is a degree of that left in the Army, and in order to survive, they're reliant on the goodwill of men, which oftentimes they do obtain by, winking their eyes or spreading their legs. It is fairly common.
And
it's strange, because I think the mainstream conventional wisdom on women in the military is that they, at least as of 10 years ago when that famous documentary came out, that apparently they suffer rampant and underreported rape and sexual assault on an appalling scale. But was that anything you inferred? Was that the pulse you got by being in there?
No, and granted, I didn't spend a whole lot of time in the big Army with the rank and file, as they would say. My experience is mostly limited to my time at West Point, just the way the timeline fell. So it obviously is, a different subset of the Army population, but I can say pretty confidently no, that stuff isn't actually happening. I think there are a few isolated cases that got blown out of proportion. For instance, like, when they talk about enlisted men going through basic training now, every Sunday, they get a 30-minute phone call, where in the past that wasn't the case. You would get like maybe 1 or 2 phone calls of 5 minutes throughout your whole time in basic training, and they want to point to that as sort of evidence as to how the Army is weakened. And that's partially true, but it's also because the Army has a tendency to overreact to things. So there was one isolated instance in which a drill sergeant was raping some female enlistee, some female recruit, trainee, and was like confiscating her mail so she couldn't tell anybody and wouldn't let her go see the chaplain. So when the Army finally got wind of that, because of course they did, you know, she's not going to be in that environment forever, they like completely flipped shit and were like, that's it. Everybody gets 30-minute phone call every week, full stop, to try and put the kibosh on that. So, but, and part of that is just shit livery, like women are so put upon, even though they were never held to the same standard. With the APFT, when I was in the Army physical fitness test, there were two distinct standards, and just the way the distribution fell. I haven't seen any data on this, but my anecdotal evidence is that the distribution of athletic ability of women is way more stratified. So, in order to sort of ensure that the appropriate number of women, you know, looking at the bell curve, fall within the acceptable PT score range, they like really lowered the minimum standard, and the standard for 100 points compared to men is a lot easier for women to obtain, or at least athletic women. So, and there was a lot of like, you would not believe how many morbidly obese NCOs I've seen in my time. It was fucking ridiculous.
You've
like
gotta be
fat,
kidding
black,
me.
sassy women in charge of an arms room, and it's like, how are you even in the Army? They probably had some sort of profile saying they couldn't do PT, but I don't know how they passed height and weight. I truly don't.
Well, I mean, you know, the exact people you just spoke of, the group that's ultimately considered beyond reproach in the extremes of shit-lib political culture. Like if you're obese, not to mention a black woman, you are morally impervious.
And they would
just consider
like they would inflict.
Yeah.
As soon as you gave people like that even just an infinitesimally small level of power over another human being, it was immediately abused. Like they would throw their weight around, their rank around. Like they were just really shitty to you for no fucking reason. There was actually one instance while I was, this was over one of the summers at West Point, and there was a tram service that went around post, because when you're an underclassman, a plebe or a yuck at West Point, you're not allowed to have a car. And you know, post is big, so from time to time you need to like go somewhere that's not really reasonably in walking distance. Anyhow, I'm standing here at this tram, right? And I'll never forget this. It was the most absurd thing I've ever seen in my life. So there was a lot of rank walking around West Point, obviously. Like I had a lot of interaction with 05s and 06s and, you know, obviously general officers. In order to resign from West Point, I had to meet with the superintendent of the academy, a 3-star general, a lieutenant general, and get his permission to leave. And there was some talk of retaining me there against my will, but I suppose that's not germane to the conversation. But anyhow, we are like 35 feet. And across, like, it wasn't really a road, but it was sort of like a vehicle pathway in between buildings that you'll see on a lot of campuses. And I got absolutely torn a fucking new one by this heavy-set black female colonel. I have no idea who the fuck she even was. I'd never seen her before or after that point in time. Because I didn't greet her properly, which was complete bullshit, because the standard is like if they're within 6 paces, then you'll render a salute and, you know, good afternoon, ma'am, you know, customs and courtesy. But that was well beyond. Like she just wanted to throw the fact that she was a colonel around, and I suspect it had something to do with the fact that the 3 of us standing there were all white men, you know.
Yeah.
So. But yeah, suffice to say, like, I saw what I considered to be the greatest institution this nation had produced become corrupted, so the whole thing's just fucked.
Nothing is safe anymore.
No, nothing is safe, nothing is sacrosanct. Like, this rot, this perfidious rot has spread well beyond our ability to control it, so.
And it gets really scary because, like, even then, military equipment has gotten so advanced that even retards can use it to striking effectiveness. It's actually really terrifying.
Good grief. Well, I must say,
Mars, for instance, it's super easy to use. Like Like someone with a 95 IQ, like an IQ of 95, could use that to decimate like anything. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was kind of my point when I said that like integrated fire support is a bitch. Like that's what these Second Amendment types don't really understand is like, yeah, on an individual level, you might be smarter and more athletic than these people, but the fact of the matter is the Second Amendment has been so eroded that you're now in possession of semi-automatic rifles at best and whatever else you can cobble together. Like, and this is what even U.S. veterans who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan and then went over to Ukraine didn't seem to understand is like when you don't have air support, when you are now the guerrilla force, like you're going to sustain casualties on an order of magnitude larger than your adversary, because that stuff they're called force multipliers for a reason. And in a larger sense, I do believe that the establishment is probably banking on the fact that it seems that technology is outpacing the decline in IQ and ability of the population of the United States.
So, if I'm understanding you properly, are you saying that U.S. military forces that were combating insurgents, if these military forces didn't have air support, they would get effectively destroyed, or they would have a much, much, much harder time without the Air Force multiplier?
Yeah, absolutely. Or even just indirect fire assets at the, even the battalion or company level. Like if you've got a couple of guys with 60 millimeter mortars attached at, the company level at your direction, I mean, that's a huge asset to have. And that was really the primary thing that, for instance, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army were coming up against. It's like they had way less trouble dealing with American infantrymen than they did dealing with sort of the trappings of capitalism. These force multipliers like air support, like indirect fire support, that came along with, being a rich neo-imperial power, and what they would try and do. And I think the movie We Were Soldiers, for as shitty of a movie as that is, depicts this rather well. They would talk about going in and trying to grab the Americans by the belt buckle or get so close that they could no longer use their fire support. Because that's what kills people on the modern battlefield. That's why they call artillery king of battle, is because really the infantry, their most deadly weapon at this point in time, and as it has been since really the First World War, is their radio, their ability to call in fire support.
So, really, military forces like the one our nation has does a fair bit of reliance on just mechanized Western military technology. So, like the cool stuff, basically.
Every competent military uses technology.
Yeah,
right. Yes, I know they use it. Of course, I'm just saying that we apparently have a painfully hard time with that.
Well, and it's that reliance. It's that reliance on technology over, like, actually getting together, using our noggins, and trying to develop a coherent military strategy. This is why we've been having such a hard time adjusting to, the shift in. And I don't want to say too much because I do have a video coming up on this. Not that I don't even think we have anybody watching right now besides us, which is fine. But
we have a few.
But there has been a shift in the way wars are fought. No longer does we're seeing an increasingly sclerotic state. A state that's unable to shift with the changing times. Getting their asses handed to them. One of my favorite insults to level against veterans is, you're now at this point 0-3, 0-4, depending on how you define it, against people wielding, illiterate goat herders wielding rusty AKs, wearing bathrobes and flip-flops, who, to quote William Lind, if we were to try and graph their resources, next to our own on like a physical bar graph, it wouldn't even register. and they're still coming out on top, and that's because there has been a shift in the way wars are fought. And our reliance on technology and this idea that winning wars is a matter of simple battle calculus where we just need to stack more bodies than our adversary and we win is part of the reason we get our asses beat so hard. But there's a lot to unpack there, and that's not the purpose of this stream.
Yeah. A pretty blackpilling subject, but at least, we know that U.S., the Civil War is not coming, at least.
Well, I mean, I think that's part
lose.
of why I made my videos. I think that there is enough, a high enough percentage on both sides of the political debate at this juncture who want armed conflict, who are thirsty for blood, that it's concerning because it doesn't take much to agitate for, armed conflict to occur. The lead up to the first Civil War is case in point. So whether or not it's going to happen, I can't say. I mean, I would lean towards no. People are very content with their bread and circuses and such, and they're too comfortable, they're too fat, they're too lazy, they're too stupid. They're, as long as you keep the calories flowing and,
like William Luther
some
Pierce
degree
said.
Yeah, some degree of a quality of life, these people aren't ever going to do anything. But I could be wrong because, I mean, I'm sure you've seen on our side of the aisle, and I know it exists on the left too, these people who are very much out for blood without truly understanding what that means.
Yeah. Emil Kierkegaard, I remember in a stream with Ed Dutton that he did, he was talking about the future of the U.S., and he was saying that instead of like the U.S. getting like a civil war, what he thinks is going to happen is that it's going to become something like Brazil or Argentina, where it's very diverse and everything. It's like a shithole, but there's no war because nobody doesn't want to do a war.
Yeah, things just get worse without climaxing to a war.
Well,
I think something will actually happen.
Again, that ties into how you define war too, and the shift in armed conflict. Like the state in those South American countries has lost a degree of their monopoly on the legitimate use of force, right? So now it's not just states versus states waging wars. We're sort of regressing back to a period of time where, business enterprises, number one, the line between business and crime has been blurred, but they have their own paramilitary forces with the cartel. Religious groups have their own military forces. Racial groups have their own military forces. Families have their own military forces. Cities have their own military forces. So, you'll see a decline in what we would traditionally understand as a war, but an uptick in armed conflict insofar as crime is concerned.
Oh, yeah,
Brazil is not a safe nation. Mexico is not a safe nation.
Yep.
Yes.
Outside of the tourist zones, that is.
Well, then, would it be a fair, logical step, at least in some way, that we encourage anyone who shares our interest to any capacity to get a gun, at least one gun?
Yeah, and that's part of what my last video was on too, is really if you want a militia movement, number one, the idea that the founders had wasn't for a standing army not to exist. Like in times of need, the federal government would activate state militias, and that's how it was supposed to be. And furthermore, they had passed legislation requiring each citizen between the ages of, I believe it was 17 to 45, to possess a firearm, kit, certain amount of ammunition, all this stuff. So I truly believe that a well-regulated militia, a well-trained and well-equipped militia is indeed the key to the security of a free state. So yes, in that sense. And it's not just owning a rifle, right? Like buying, I actually have an AR sitting right next to me, but buying, this piece of metal, this, $1,000 piece of metal is not going to confer upon you some sort of magical military prowess, right? All it is, if you don't know how to use it and you're not well regulated, is a 7 to 9 pound paperweight, an expensive one at that. So, yes, I would encourage people to not only buy a firearm, but adopt the 2 is 1, 1 is none mentality, where you need to have spare parts for it and understand how to properly maintain your equipment. Don't just shoot once or twice a year from a bench at 100 yards. Get used to, non-static shooting. So firing on the move from, standing, kneeling in the prone, engaging targets from 50 to, I would say at the very least, 300 meters, obviously depending on your range where you can get to, but you need to develop a degree of skill. You also need a lot of ancillary equipment to sustain a fight that most people don't think of. How are you going to ever be a part of a militia if you don't have some method by which you're going to communicate? Yeah, you can go rudimentary like the NVA did in many instances and use like whistles and bugles, but you need to have some sort of radio communication and the knowledge of how to do that. You need to have a stockpile of basic medical supplies, like a trauma kit that will save your life and stop you from bleeding out, but also the knowledge to use it. I could go on at some length, but it's not just the rifle. The rifle is a pressure release valve. The rifle does not set you free. You becoming a member of the well-regulated militia sets and keeps you free. And that's something that really hasn't existed in this country since really the passage of the National Firearms Act, which started restricting all sorts of things, including destructive devices like explosives, which traditionally were always allowed by the civilian populace to keep.
What year was that legislation?
Depends which one you're talking about. The one I'm talking about in particular was the National Firearms Act of, I believe, 1968. Let me Google that real quick.
Figures, doesn't it?
Well, there was 1934, which I believe created the first registry. Then there was another one, I believe, in 68. There was something called the Hughes Amendment in 1986, which was the one that banned the manufacture of new fully automatic weapons and required all existing ones to be put on a registry, which is why fully automatic firearms are technically legal on the civilian market. But you have to go through so much red tape, and they're so freaking expensive because you can't manufacture any new ones after 1986. So, like, if you want a fully automatic AR, which, mind you, like, for the individual rifleman, no, like, full auto fire isn't entirely relevant, but within the context of, like, moving as a small unit, right, having sort of a squad automatic weapon asset is imperative to being able to pin the enemy in place so you can maneuver. But like, if you want a full auto AR-15, let's take a look at what they transferable machine gun sales. Like right now, a full auto AR-15 is going for something on the order of $30,000.
Okay.
So that's what you're looking at. And that's because of, conservatives refusing to, step up and conserve anything. And so it's like, and it's not just like, yeah, again, this is stuff I've already covered in my videos, but it's like, yeah, you may come out on top in the same way that the IRA came out on top after a few centuries of fighting the British. And it was really just because of the British lost. Like, if the British had wanted to retain some sort of imperial control over Ireland, they would do it. Like, right. There's no doubt about it. It's just a matter of political will at that point in time.
Would you say it was kind of like the British in India by the time 1947 rolled around?
Right. I mean, just...
Yeah, that was how it was with all the colonies, really. Just that the empires didn't care anymore.
They just didn't really want to do it anymore.
Well, in large part, like, the new kid on the block was the United States, who, after World War II, was very anti-imperial for some reason. And, like...
empires except for its own, to be clear.
To such a degree were they anti-imperialist that Ho Chi Minh actually approached the United States government thinking he was going to get support for his war against the French in Indochina some years before the United States took that war over after the French were ousted after Dien Bien Phu. But, Yeah, it's not just, and you would need heavier ordnance as well. You would need some sort of, shoulder-fired anti-air asset. You would need some sort of shoulder-fired anti-tank asset. You don't have to achieve technological parity with, your adversary, like in a hypothetical Civil War Part 2 Electric Boogaloo. I'm certainly not advocating that guerrillas attempt to acquire, T-80 tanks from the Russian Federation. That would just not go away.
Just so the person
the Russians and Chinese wouldn't help either. They would not help us at all.
Just so from the person from the ADL who's watching knows, we're not advocating for any kind of
I have repeatedly disavowed violence. Yeah. Don't do it. It's stupid. I'm telling you why you would die at this juncture.
I think the real reason for getting weapons like this is actually just sort of self-defense, not just against home invasions or whatever, but in the future we're going to be seeing a lot of power go to cartels and stuff, and you're going to need at that point militia forces to fight them, because cartels have their own private militaries at this point that are strapped up very well, not as well as the U.S. military obviously, or a first world military, but they're strapped up very well. They have even special divisions with,
I think the best use of the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment in action, at least within my lifetime, obviously there was that one instance of guerrillas overthrowing their city government in the South in the 40s. I don't know enough about that to even Google it, but that did happen. Maybe somebody in chat knows, or one of you guys. But during the BLM riots, there was this video, right? And I'm certain this wasn't the only instance of this, where there are BLM protesters who, as soon as the sun goes down, would turn into rioters, and they're marching past, up the street in this suburban neighborhood, and lining the roads, which are the entryway to that suburban neighborhood, is this ragtag group of, the citizenry wielding ARs, and they're in their body armor and all that
God
stuff.
Bless.
They're very clearly let me see if I can find the video here.
In South Africa, I think our situation in the future is not, it's not going to be civil war. It's going to be more like sort of South Africa, where the citizenry has to protect itself because the police won't protect them. So the citizenry in South Africa, they actually hire a bunch of private military companies and have their own sort of militias to protect them from criminals and mobs and stuff. And that's what I think is going to be happening in the future here in the U.S. You're not going to you don't want to get guns to fight the government, because you'd lose, and also the government, you'd lose. But you want to get guns to fight the criminals, who are becoming increasingly organized,
which can embolden vigilantes.
This is just
but
okay.
In 2020,
well, the thumbnail of this was what I was talking about. Let's see if I can actually find it. But maybe we'll just play it. There's a lot of this stuff going around. This is not so important.
These groups have diverse causes, including white supremacy and opposition.
Well, I was about to say, to attempt a coherent point here,
and been arrested.
It seems like the vibe I got from both of you is that the last bulwark, and I know you have a little bit less faith that we can resist the government per se, but the last bulwark against the global homo shit liberty that has infested our government like termites, and then the various BLM hordes who are out for blood. What do we have left? Well, we have the Second Amendment, or what's left of it. We have some semblance of armaments, and so then it makes me wonder, when you see these shitlibs and shittards writing for Rags and The Atlantic or The Intercept, who are just gunning so fucking hard at taking our guns away and disarming civilians, trying to argue against the Second Amendment, or how gun violence is such an overwhelmingly awful thing. We got to do something about it. We got to stop the gun epidemic, the epidemic of gun violence. I'm like, I've explained this before in a stream with Jim Dewey, but gun violence basically isn't a thing in America. It's not really actually a problem. It's a problem for young black men in cities, but outside of that, not really. And so it's not is a pretty elementary statistical calculation to make to realize gun violence is not a big thing in the United States. Yet they keep hammering it so freaking hard, and so I keep thinking maybe this is ascribing a bit of maliciousness to them, but maybe those that be the establishment, the elites, the power guys know that us having guns is pretty much the only thing that's left in the way. That's an obstacle to them doing whatever they want to us.
I would disagree with that actually, and I think Jim also disagrees with that.
I mean, I think to a degree, but I'll let you continue with your point.
Second Amendment. Yeah, I mean, this at that point, like, the whole last bulk of the fence, that's really just a crutch, because when the government comes to take your guns, you're like boomer cons and normal cons, they're going to give those guns up, mostly without a fight. And you can't win a fight against the government. The reason you should be armed, though, is because eventually the government's going to become something like the government in Mexico, where it can't really enforce the law, and you have a bunch of like cartels and gangs carving up the territory and enforcing their own law with their own guns. And so to fight that, citizens will have to be armed. They'll rely on militias and private military companies for protection, just like in South Africa.
Okay, so I guess that's a tweak of a bit of the point I made.
I mean, I think that they like the Second Amendment as it stands in the state that it currently is. With we allow the possession of semi-automatic rifles with things that wouldn't be out of place in a first world, military in the hands of an infantryman. It is a threat to a degree because, and again, I'm not advocating that there wouldn't be some threat or saying that there wouldn't be some threat posed by a guerrilla movement. Because in a hypothetical Minecraft server, you can start getting real kooky real quick, because any smart guerrilla force, they're going to do everything they can not to stand toe to toe with the United States Army, for instance. They're going to hit critical infrastructure points. They're going to, do their utmost to close down rail lines and, start like the same tactics of the IRA and Nelson Mandela. Like you would start to see, busloads full of, well, I don't even know that we need to go there because I don't want to get banned, but suffice to say that there are soft targets out there, in Minecraft, which would be readily available to, a militia movement, a guerrilla movement. But my larger point is that there are better ways to go about achieving our goals, certainly that don't involve, bunny leaping into buzzsaw type violence, wherein we probably will not come out on top.
Right now, I put a little meme of sorts in our private chat, and I wonder if B. Williams still agrees with this. I guess he doesn't. But the point of the meme is that the tanks and the jets and the battleships and the drones that are always mentioned as some kind of response to those advocating in favor of the Second Amendment. And then the meme is just responding to that supposed rebuttal, saying that subjugating and enslaving the people of a nation through that kind of technology is not actually that simple.
Right. And I mean, obviously,
the U.S. government would pull it off, though, because for them, this is an existential threat. Like a civil war and a guerrilla movement is an existential threat, and they would go as far as possible, like as far as they would need.
I think there's some truth to that. I also think that's the biological black pill in your brain talking again. I mean, I think there's some truth to it, but I know that
there is
I got to filter some of that out.
There is some truth to it. Like obviously, the people that pilot, a UAV, they have homes, they have addresses. Like there is a way to circumvent these pieces of technology. I guess my larger point is like most people don't understand how bloody this would get and how terrible war actually is.
Absolutely.
The first Civil War, we had 2% of the population of the United States. I want that to sink in. Out of every 100 people in the United States, 2 people died as a result of the first Civil War. If we were to extrapolate that number out to today, you'd be looking at...
It's a lot of millions.
you'd be looking at 7 million dead, and that's, you know, if we were to just extrapolate those numbers out. So,
well, but the ability to harm the civilian population is so much higher now than it was during the Civil War. Like, again, you're talking about like hitting infrastructure and all that. Like, now people are way more dependent on infrastructure to get their basic necessities, because back then, you know, a lot of the time you grew your own food or whatever, or it came locally and stuff like that. It doesn't do that anymore. It comes from across the country.
Sure,
You know, so
geographically interlinked through that a lot more.
Yeah. Like, so a real U.S. Civil War would have death tolls somewhere in the tens of millions, really, just by all the civilians dying from lack of infrastructure.
Well, now, I mean, obviously, considering the tone that this regime has taken towards the domestic war on terror and far-right terrorism, I can see that they have probably a fair amount of disdain towards those who could be potential perpetrators of domestic terrorism, which means pretty much anyone like us. I show a little bit of pause. Maybe it's my naivete. Maybe B. Williams will swoop in like a mastodon to black pill the shit out of me again. But I have a little bit of trepidation about their willingness to potentially kill tens of millions of us. Like, I don't know about that just yet.
Yeah, I don't know, because like the powers that be, right? Their main concern is remaining the powers that be at all costs. I mean, I think that's how we got to this point. And again, this is actually tying in rather nicely with the next video that I'm working on, but that's their primary concern. They're willing to sell out the people of the United States, and they've done so to line their own pockets for decades, if not the better part of a century at this point. So I think that their main concern would be you know, the potential fallout from these actions. And if you can frame it in such a way, I think, you know, really the sarin gas attacks in Syria is a pretty good example of how stuff might go down, where you've got, you know, a sarin gas attack that one side is claiming didn't occur and the other side is claiming is perpetrated by the other. Like, you can kick up enough dust and enough confusion to you could get away with doing something really truly evil and pinning it on your adversary, you know. Especially again when it poses an existential threat to the United States. Like, I don't know, obviously I'm not meaning to demonize everybody who's left of me, right? Like, I think by and large most people want to do good, you know, but the path to hell is paved with good intentions. I do believe that the people with entrenched political power, though, are not good people and would go to extraordinary lengths to maintain their power, up to and including committing war crimes.
Right, and I think the weaponization of the left too, because I know you're a little older than we are, Jim Dewey. Maybe you remember that era a bit better than we do. In the 2000s, when the left did a lot of kvetching about the Patriot Act and the war on terror, and how Bush and Cheney were eroding civil liberties at an unbelievably fast rate. But then a solid portion of said shitlibs are suddenly a lot more on board with the intelligence community and trusting the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and or the ATF and the domestic war on terror. They're very on board with that. They're very enthusiastic about the January 6th show trials, and they've been very, very, very well activated and weaponized by the whole Ukraine phenomenon. You just need to look at someone with the Ukraine flag on there, and suddenly they're borderline tools of the State Department. And so I do think that is a very considerable factor, where if you were to take the MSNBC shitlib types, who would probably be in support of whatever the State Department or the FBI were to perpetrate on people like us, like, they would probably be, you know, pretty vigorously activated. Like, I think they would be right there at the front of the line to support what the feds would try to do to us.
Yeah, it would become the current thing. You know,
Yeah.
It would be, you would have the I stand with, you know, whatever flags floating around, and some sort of battle cry like January 6th. Like, it's also tiresome. You know,
Like, there's an article I plan on writing at some point. Maybe I won't, because I'm a lazy bastard. But I'm going to call it, like, shitlib warmongers, where at this point largely due to partisan hackery, I think. But those who identify as liberals or identify as Democrats, compared to independents or Republicans, are a lot more eager and a lot more vigorous about perpetrating this war on domestic terrorism, and more in favor of increasing tensions in the Russia-Ukraine war, and are way more willing to deep throat the FBI or the CIA.
And that's really interesting to me, and I don't know that I have the answer as to why that phenomenon's occurring, right? Because these are the same people that would not shut up about the military-industrial complex almost from day one. Like, 2004 is when they stopped flying putting the little yellow ribbon magnets on the back of their cars that said, "I support the troops." Like, they were so against. That's how Obama won in large part in 2008.
Right.
Was by talking about ending the war in Iraq. So how they, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to me how software updates get pushed out to the normie NPCs like that, and they'll just pull a complete 180.
All people would do horrible things if they're told to, frankly.
Well, I think I'll try to explain a portion of what you're getting at, Jim Dewey, where something we notice a lot in the white shitlib left is that nothing is really a problem to them unless it negatively affects brown people. Like, I can come up with an unrelated example to that, but I'll just move along. Yeah. So with the war on terror, when it was targeting Muslims or followers of Islam to a broad degree, obviously that activates a sort of censor in the mind of a shitlib, and they start becoming very quote-unquote principled and very, very caring towards civil liberties and all that jazz. But then once you turn the reticle, or the firing reticle, over to someone that they very strongly hate, like if you were to conjure to these shitlibs, or even the farther left shitlibs, their least favorite person, it would be white people like us with our political persuasion. And so then if you talk about the government organizing a program of taking down said people, I think it makes a lot of sense that these shitlibs are suddenly very, very much on board with that, especially when they've been propagandized to hell and back by the MSM that this right-wing terror thing is a very, very big problem. I mean, to me, that makes the phenomenon seem more explainable.
Right. And I mean, that's what everything seems to boil down to, is this concerted effort on the part of the left to sort of do everything in their power to harm white people and help brown people. And it's so interesting to me too, like, again, how quickly the tables have flipped, because I think we talked about this in our last stream, if not just over chat. It's like, it wasn't all that long ago that it was considered a really funny big own in the Obama-Romney debate, how Obama said, because Romney said something to the effect of Russia is the number one threat to the United States right now.
Right,
And Obama says, hey, the 80s called and they want your foreign policy back. But, has it even been a decade since that remark was made? And now we're, talking about the great threat posed by the paper tiger that apparently is the Russian Federation. And these psychopaths, too, they want to keep perpetuating this war. Like, they refuse to come to the negotiating table. I think Alt-Hype has done a much better job on it than I can do. But it's like, I mean, the fact that Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea ended up a part of Ukraine is the result of a Soviet administrative error in the collapse of the Soviet Union. Like, these are people who, no, I don't necessarily believe they're getting genocided like some of them will claim. But they're certainly not being treated very nicely by the Ukrainians. They're Russian-speaking peoples who, by and large, want to be part of Russia. So, I mean, the fact that we won't even negotiate on that, we're not willing to take one step back to stop all the killing, is just sickening to me. Like, I'm a big proponent of no more brother wars.
Yeah. But anyways, guys, it's been an hour and a half, and I haven't told my Redpill story yet.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Mine is somewhat simple. I got Redpilled around early 2018. What was happening was so before then, like Gamergate brought me into sort of internet politics. I became a big follower of Sargon of Akkad. Classically liberal.
Classically liberal.
And all that. Yeah. Staunch evolution denier. Well, leading up to my red pilling, I kept seeing more and more videos of Sargon covering news articles where some melanin enhanced individuals or Arabs had committed some crimes and were getting defended by the liberals. And in the comments of the video, I'd occasionally see people like bringing up it's not just about culture, and I disregarded these people as like, oh, they're no different from the left and all that.
Right.
Until one bit, and like I got to the point where I was like, when I'd hear of a crime being committed, and most of the time I would guess, oh, was it a melanin enhanced individual, and I'd be right. And I was like, please don't be a black guy, please don't be a black guy, because I think even then I understood what this kind of meant, which is that they weren't really applicable to first world society. And so, and I began to ask a lot of questions like, okay, why was East Asia and Japan able to recover from World War II and a lot more damage, well, after facing a lot more damage than like Africa, and why is it that after gaining their independence, Africa is still poor as hell, whereas Japan, after being bombed to hell and nuked twice, is one of the biggest economies in the world, is one of the best places to be. Why is that? I kept asking myself these questions until eventually I was looking at one Sargon video covering one of the immigrant crimes in like the UK, and I saw out of the corner of my eye in the related videos section a video by a guy by the name of the Alternative Hypothesis. And the video itself seemed a lot different from the normal shitlib videos I'd get recommended, because I'd never heard of the Alternative Hypothesis guy before, and the title itself was very weird. It was Educating Sargon and V on the Heritability of Political Views.
What a great video!
And so I was really curious. I'd never seen this guy before. This was so much different from like a shitlib video, and so I ended up giving it a watch, and my mind was blown. My prior suspicions had been confirmed, and I was like, "Fuck!" Like I'd never seen something so well sourced before.
Right.
I'd never seen just something so good at arguing its point. And I just proceeded to binge watch the rest of Ryan's channel, and I became radicalized over like, well, I wouldn't say radicalized. I wouldn't. That's a buzzword.
You were awakened.
I became a race realist over the course of like a month as I watched through Ryan's vids and realized that I didn't have any real arguments against him, or I didn't have any real foundations for my anti sort of race realism views. That was just stuff told to me by schools, which didn't source anything and are obviously political and all that. So that's how my sort of
I distinctly remember the Sargon of Akkad days myself, and whichever shiplib out there put together that article on the Sargon PragerU pipeline to the alt-right was 100% correct, because that's how you start to leave the cathedral, to borrow that term, is, and ultimately I think we probably all experienced to a degree the same phenomenon of like, you're hearing these very grating things that are grating to you. Hey, or grating to your programming. Hey, black people, their position and their socioeconomic status as a result of, really things innate to them that they can't control. So for things like, IQ, for instance, but other behavioral traits that are also heritable. And this is the first time you're hearing that, and it's coming from a right-wing voice, and it's like you keep waiting for this great refutation that never ever ends up coming. Like, it's just it's so well sourced, and nobody can actually, like, they'll go up in these debates, or they'll have these video back and forths, and they just destroy the opposition because there is at least a high degree of truth to what they're saying.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think
And
it's
not only did it change my views, it changed like how I want the foundations of my beliefs to be, which is that I want things to be well sourced in data, and like just what does the actual research say, and I began to dislike the prior sort of logic chain nonsense that libertarians use, and that
Yeah,
has
yeah.
brought me here.
I think people who, obviously, political alignment and orientation aligns very strongly with, race and genetic makeup. People on the right wing are a lot more primed to listen to quantifiable, like hard data studies than they're a lot more data driven than feelings driven. Whereas the left would certainly be the inverse, though they like to cling to must science.
Yeah.
Well, I just think that, as I tried to establish at the beginning, that there's this rigor and there's this boldness you find on the alt right that is more satisfactory as a response to those on the left than you find in the mainstream normicon right. And the part of why, even though I didn't agree with a lot of what Ryan was saying when I first listened to his videos, it was a combination of I liked his voice. I thought he was just entertaining to listen to, but also he would tackle concepts like the imperialism prong of the oppression narrative, where we talk about British colonialism in India with the supposed genocide perpetrated by the Belgians in the Congo and stuff like that. And to me, I really, 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 really liked that he covered those topics, because the mainstream right almost avoids them like the plague. Like they never go into much detail actually providing a defense of the British's conduct or the Belgians' conduct in those situations, usually because, as I've said ad nauseum to B. Williams before, the mediocrity of the American right knows no bounds. Like intellectually, they will find ways to keep disappointing you. But then here you got Alt-Type, who's actually fighting that battle, who's actually fighting historical crutches that are used to tar, feather, smear, and blood libel people like us. And like he's actually fighting the battle that matters. Why in the hell aren't there more people like him? And so,
well, and that's just
that's
it. It's like I got sick and tired of hearing the Dennis Pragers of the world talk about, like, they'll acquiesce on some level to the points made by the left, and it's just very clear to anybody with an IQ above room temperature that 10 years from now, the thing we're arguing about is going to be a sacrosanct tenet of the right. I mean, just now, I'm not that old, I'm 24 years old, but I'm old enough to remember referendums before Obergefell v. Hodges, where like gay marriage was soundly defeated by the people of the United States, and now the Senate will not question it; they won't touch it. I mean, I forget the name of that act that passed, but with partial Republican support, codifying gay and interracial marriage into law.
Oh, is that the new one that just happened?
Yeah, the
okay,
and so it's like.
Like,
yeah, and that was what on some level inspired me to create videos, was not just Ryan, but this idea that we need to stop being so reactive, because that's a huge thing in, even any introductory like military strategy type courses. You never want to be reactive. You never want to be on the back foot, or anybody who's engaged in some sort of combative type sport like wrestling or jiu-jitsu or whatever. You want to be taking the offensive, trying to destabilize your opponent, throwing punches, not just throwing up blocks. And, that's where we need to start actively tackling some of these pieces of the overarching oppression narrative, right? Even if it's, very, very tedious, because that's ultimately what did it for me is, there was some point where I reached a critical mass of, okay, well, if this isn't true and this isn't true and this isn't true, the thesis of, actually there's no oppression starts to make a whole lot more sense. And so if in my own small part I can play a role in sort of changing the momentum of the struggle in which we are engaged. And make no mistake, like, this is a struggle of an existential nature. You know, I'm going to do it. I certainly don't want to look back at the end of my life having done absolutely nothing to curtail the slow march of quote unquote progress.
Well, you know the little parable about the Irishman who went to heaven or whatever, where he
don't
dies.
Actually.
Well, I mean, I'm loosely recalling what I can. It was from some speech I went to, where basically the guy dies, he goes up to heaven, and then the angel that's there in heaven asks him, or says, "All right, happy that you're here. Now, can I see your scars?" And he goes like, "What scars? I don't have any scars." Then the angel says back to him, "So there was really nothing worth fighting for when you were alive?" And so that's kind of what I think about a lot. Like, do I really want to just coast through the most squeamishly I can and don't accumulate any scars while I live? That seems pretty crappy.
And that's just it, is like, I really identified the quote, and maybe I'll butcher it, but "Is life so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery," from the "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. You know, right. Ultimately, and this was, you know, when I was entering the Army, it was at the tail end of the global war on terror, but there still were combat deployments. You know, and to me, to reconcile it in my mind, death is a foregone conclusion, right? I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. Like, no matter what I do, I am going to die. I may as well have lived for something, you know, even if I die young, not that, you know, my posting on YouTube, you know, my shit posting on YouTube is going to result in my death, but it could foreseeably have some sort of negative impact on my life. You know, I'd rather die on my feet, so to speak, than live on my knees and never have done anything worthwhile.
Yeah,
just got reminded of the funny sort of Twitter meme where the VeggieTales account on Twitter. Did y'all ever hear about that?
Well, what specifically?
So there was a VeggieTales account on Twitter. I think it was like VeggieTales Facts or something like that, and basically this person, whoever had the Twitter account, was like really funny because like they hated pedophiles and like to an extreme degree, and would like tweet about it a bunch and make some very spicy tweets about it. And someone replied to one of their spicy tweets with like, "No, don't do that, you're going to get banned." And then their response was, "I'd rather die standing than live on me."
Yes, okay, I remember that. Yeah.
But I think we touched on something that I don't want to lose, too, because it's an important point. And I don't want to be mistaken either. So I'm going to be careful about how I'm phrasing this. But the religiosity of the right has oftentimes you know, hampered their ability to take concrete action in the real world. Like, my own father, so to speak, or not so to speak, but my own father, when I speak to him about these sorts of things, you know, he's a very religious man. He's actually a cleric. And
oh, wow.
Master's degree in theology. That's all the man has ever cared about, is reading, you know, religious tomes. And that's sort of his thing. And anytime I sort of broach any of these subjects like this, a lot of the response I get is, to boil it down, well, life on this earth doesn't matter anyway. The kingdom of heaven is all that matters. So why bother? Why try? Why fighting? You know, why try fighting? And I don't want to take credit for this. You know, I got this little quip from, you know, Devin Stack, is like, yeah, God is in control, right? You know, if you're a religious man. But just because he's ultimately going to come out on top doesn't mean that it's going to be within your lifetime. There have been some very shitty stretches in history, you know, where some very terrible times. So there are things out there worth fighting for. This corporeal realm does in fact matter.
And that's true. Of course, I'm pretty sure Jesus calls you to do good and not just let evil do its thing, you know?
And I don't know that he would disagree with that, but I think that's in the back of the minds of a lot of people on our side of the aisle. Is
I agree with that.
Well, God's going to handle it. You know what I mean? Well,
Or
to
that-
quote Joshua
no.
Graham, we can't let God do all the work. You know?
Work. Yes. Well, that'd be a better way to go about things. But I concur with your point that even though I am religious, I've had to exercise myself a little bit of this idea that, there's this world, bad things will happen, bumps will show up, you'll be inconvenienced or nettled at this or that, or maybe to an even greater degree, but at least there's heaven at the end of it. And I'm like, even if it's true, which I still believe, that's kind of very, very counterproductive to doing anything to improve the condition of the life you're in. The idea that you've got not just another life after this, but a wonderfully fantastic life in heaven after this might very inconveniently change your perspective about this world.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think too, at least a big part of my issue with religion isn't the idea of God, right? I would consider myself a believer, and really the most compelling thing to me is, sort of surface level and cursory as it may seem, is really the complexity of the world around us. I'm not convinced that there has been enough time for evolution, at least the way that it's described, to have taken place. And even if it did, there needs to be some sort of prime mover. As simple as that may seem, that's right. What really does it.
Something had to have caused this.
That's what really does it for me. But,
Right.
the subversion of, in particular, Christian institutions has been it's been a big lead weight around the ankle of many on the right, especially as it would relate to race realism. And it's almost tied into this religious creation myth of the founding of the United States, which in some instances, I don't believe that, the idealization of the founding fathers is necessarily always a positive thing. Because when we take this one phrase, all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that has no scriptural basis. That's just people saying things that sound cool, to put into a political document. And so there's this religious nature to the founding of the United States. You've got a lot of, especially after the civil rights movement, you've got a lot of the upper crust of religious organizations, from the top down, pushing this all men are created equal, let your daughter marry a black man type, policies. It's really just ingrained shit libbery into the conservative mind, and it takes a lot of deprogramming to step away from that and say, no, race, human biodiversity is a real thing.
Yes. Right. Human divergent evolution happened. But I was trying to say something right about the founding fathers too. There's both the bit of a worship of the founding fathers, but also just being plain wrong about the founding fathers because of how the right likes to seed ground about things. Because as Ryan has pointed out in his one response to the PragerU video about the alt-right, where it's like the right has this conception of the founding fathers trying to defend them, but through the lens of post-1960s, largely Semitically influenced liberal norms, which is, of course, is impossible. You can't square away the two. And so, as Ryan says, shit or get off the pot. Like, actually support what the founding fathers said at the time they existed and wrote those documents, which the left tends to believe what the founding fathers said at their word, but they just think that's a bad thing. And then you got people on the right who are trying to gerrymander around how the fathers were and create this alternate version of how they are that conveniently fits snugly and nicely with the post-1960s conception of everything. It's like it's just like with everything else the right does, where you're put in this nearly indefensible box just trying to stay afloat.
Well, and that's like people lack a sense of historical perspective as well as to how recent this stuff is. Number one, the United States is a very young country. Number two, 1965, like my grandfather was in like middle age at that point in time. Like this is something that was, this is in living memory.
Yeah.
That all these changes, and it just boggles my mind that old people don't say more about it.
I think they're too scared to. Like, I remember Sean last when B. Williams and I were having a conversation well into the AM with him. One thing Sean last said is that if you were to ask a boomer or perhaps someone older what they thought about the Civil Rights Act in the mid-'60s, at least half of them will lie to you. Like, I think a lot of them, like even William F. Buckley Jr., like had a debate with, I can't remember, it was some significant black figure about segregation or about the Civil Rights Act. Being on the right meant you opposed that piece of legislation. Being Barry Goldwater, you opposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but because that's just been a lost battle at this point, you just got to go along with it or risk getting your head cut off.
Well, and there was this weird, like, people have whitewashed, and not in the sense that it now means, but they've sort of paved over the true nature of the civil rights movement in the 60s as well. Like, it wasn't this movement that was all about the peaceful integration and access to white spaces for blacks. Like, there was this weird confluence, and somebody put this meme, which I've got up on screen right now, in my Discord earlier today, me and the boys enjoying our first Kanye concert, and it's George Lincoln Rockwell and two dudes who I don't know, literally at a Nation of Islam speaking event, because there was this confluence of,
holy shit, that's nuts.
Yeah, there's this confluence of ideas, even though that these people they're very diametrically opposed to each other. On some level, I have to believe that horseshoe theory is real, because
it's real. It's real. No, it totally is.
It's real. These people on the opposite extremes of the spectrum, both of whom, on some level at least, advocated for violence and separation of blacks. Like, they're both at this event because they both agree that blacks should go back to Africa. Like, right. I had never heard of that prior to actually a couple of weeks ago when I was doing research for my other video, and I stumbled across, I was talking about, Malcolm X. I don't even remember the context of it, but I was like reading his wiki page, and on, the wiki page on the Nation of Islam, and saw that he was like in cahoots with George Lincoln Rockwell. And I'm like, so the timeline's just always been cursed. Like, it wasn't just now that, we've got based black man running around.
Yeah,
I know at least the horseshoe theory is kind of real when it comes to like profile pictures on social media, where like you'll have the centrists who have like their real name and like a default profile picture. You move a bit further either side of the spectrum, they have like historical figures, and then eventually, like when you get the most far right and far left ones, they have the same kind of picture, which is like anime girls, and it's right. It's crazy, but it's like true.
Well, and I also want to say that to me, it's a little more complicated than a horseshoe in the case of Louis Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam, and George Lincoln as well. Because to me, I don't even know if it's necessarily a horseshoe that separates them. To me, I just think it's the aggregate grug brain of whites and the aggregate grug brain of blacks who happen to just agree on the same thing. But the thing is, right wings of different persuasions, like of different countries or different religions or different races, tend to be incompatible. They tend to be at disagreement with each other. Like if you're a far-right nationalist in Japan, you believe a very different historical narrative of how your military acted in World War II, compared to being a far-right nationalist in the United States about how your country acted in World War II. Like they're not compatible. They both can't be true at the same time. There's a bit of a zero-sum worldview intersection going on. But innately, you believe in certain right-wing things, or very far-right things. Like in this case, Louis Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam, very notorious for their attitude towards Semitic peoples. And as you imagine, I'm sure George Lincoln Rockwell might have shared some of that conception as well. And you find this literally everywhere, except Jews. Just look at the Middle East as well. You got a very strong grug brain presence in the Middle East when it comes to attitudes towards Jews or homosexuality, or you could call quote unquote based views towards women or whatever. But I just think it shows that the un-Semitically contaminated grug brain that you find in most peoples is something that needs to be tapped into more.
Right. It's just always amusing to me how people come to the same conclusion in very different ways in that regard.
Oh, I know. That's true. Well, didn't B. Williams, didn't you post that one tweet in the Discord yesterday about it was the tweet about wanting white people to pay for the abortions of people belonging to minorities. And I just think that's hilarious. Imagine that. Just very cordially asking, hey, white people, give us money so we can kill unborn black children. Like a shitlib asking for that. I mean, that is a horseshoe that has come full circle.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that was a fake tweet, though.
Okay. All right, then. Well, I'll have to retract that. The fact that it was believable, at least in my mind, is...
No, I concur that, like, that's... The fact that we're not sure if it's real or not is impactful in and of itself. Like, that is meaningful.
Post-irony society.
What the fuck?
But anyways, so yeah, what's the plan for now? Because it's been about 2 hours. We have not talked about the displacement of Native Americans.
No, we haven't. But I do want to end on a couple clips though. Like we could either watch the Muhammad Ali clip that is based in Epic.
I don't know why I've been trying this whole time. I don't know why this watch together is not cooperating. Like all I if you're having problems, try disabling.
Well, maybe I mean B. Williams knows how to make it work, but I guess fretting over it.
Yeah, maybe we want
to. Victor, you can join, and then we can. You can also send us the link, and we can see and try and get that up.
Well, then, but combating the narrative is the one that's streaming it, though. It's his laptop through which everything is happening.
Okay.
I don't know why it's not cooperating because I'm doing the same shit we did last time with this, like just pasting the link into. Maybe I'm just being retarded, but I don't understand why it's not.
Keeps giving me a white screen for some reason.
Let me try it.
You know, I bet the main reason we don't have as many viewers as a normal combating the narrative stream is because we aren't drinking.
I actually think I don't know if you were.
I'm joking.
Oh yeah. Okay, let's come on watch together. I don't know why it's being.
Yeah, because I click on it and it's just white. Like it's just a white screen for some reason.
Okay, hold on. Technical difficulties. If I can't get it in like the next 5 minutes, we might just end it. But
have to call it quits. But
okay.
But don't give up on the
dream. I think I got it now though.
Okay.
Well here, I'll send this in the chat. It's the new link I'm sending now.
Cool. Let's join it. Come on. It's circling around. It's buffering.
There it is. That's it.
Why are you being so stupid?
Is full screen just not an option?
Evidently not.
We haven't tried it.
No, like there's no full screen.
Yeah, there's no full screen button. Well, in any case, they can still see it. I mean, all right, you guys ready?
I can't see it. That could just be my hang up though. Like what the frick? Why is it not?
You haven't joined the lobby.
Well, no, I'm clicking on the link he gave. Obviously, I haven't joined the lobby because.
Are you clicking on the second link or the first link? Because the second one is the real one.
Yeah, I click on the second one.
Interesting.
It said fuck. What the hell? Could you just resend the link?
Yeah, I can try that.
Yeah. Maybe it'll just work that time. Sometimes we found that works. Damn it, it's just black. It was just white. It's nothing.
Weird.
Well, I guess if it works for you two guys, it'll at least come through on the stream. So.
All right, we'll start it now.
And another thing, when you say integration,
why is it so fucking quiet?
Too, right? All been together. Right, sure. And I'm sure
no
intelligent white person watching this show.
Can you hear it just fine?
I can hear it, yeah. It's just quiet.
Okay, volume's maxed out. There's nothing I can do about it.
No intelligent white man in his or her right white mind want black boys and black girls marrying their white sons and daughters, and in return introducing their grandchildren as half brown, kinky-haired black people.
I wouldn't object to that.
Well, you wouldn't, but a lot of them would.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people. No, this is the point.
What I'm trying to say is this.
I can hear it decently. Actually,
Who is that?
Through the stream.
Who is that?
William F. Buckley Jr.?
That he's talking to?
Says this.
Oh, some British presenter.
You really ain't gonna have it. You on the show and you gotta say that.
That's not true.
I don't care if my daughter marries a black guy.
Why would you want to do that?
Because
Who
I don't
is he
I don't have any
talking to?
different
On
views.
Parkinson, the British television chat show.
Society's made us
You know
different.
we're different. If we all together.
The society's made us different.
Parkinson, a chat show. It's Michael Parkinson,
He's
an English
being.
broadcaster.
I agree. He's being really based right now. He's saying that no, society hasn't made us different. We're different. But this guy's a Yakub believer. So
Beings he made all.
Yep.
Listen, bluebirds fly with bluebirds.
He's just right wing in a different racial body.
Listen. Tell me when I'm wrong. Pigeons want to be with pigeons.
But we
Tell
have
me when I'm wrong.
intelligence.
Well,
We have an
we
intellect
must.
that
Well, we
they
should
don't
have. They don't have intelligence, but yet
No.
they stay together. We should have more intelligence than them, right? Buzzards are with buzzards. Right? Buzzards are with buzzards. Bluebirds are with bluebirds. They all are birds, but they got different cultures. The eagles like to hang out in the mountains. The buzzard like to fly around the desert.
Well,
the bluebird like to fly around the trees
There'd
and
be
the
certain
grass.
problems a buzzard mating with a sparrow, wouldn't there?
What?
There'd be certain.
Right. And that's,
I
we
mean-
have the problems too.
No,
I don't see no black and white couples in England or America walking around proud, holding their children
That's because society.
and going out.
That's society's fault. I mean, we've got to educate people around it.
Well, life is too short for me to be raised catching hell for something like that. I'd rather go and be my own. I have a beautiful daughter, beautiful wife. They look like me. We're all happy, and I don't have no trouble. I ain't got no trouble. I ain't that much in love with no woman to go through all that hell. Ain't no one woman that good. You understand?
I understand. Yeah, I do understand. I understand. But I think it's sad that
It ain't sad because I
It
want
is
my
sad.
child to
It's
look like me.
attitude.
Every intelligent person wants his child to look like him. I'm sad because I want to blot out my race and lose my beautiful identity. Chinese love Chinese. They love the little slanted-eyed, pretty brown-skinned babies. Pakistanis love their culture. Jewish people love their culture. A lot of Catholics don't want to marry number Catholics. They
Shut
want
it
to live
down.
and stay the same. Who want to spot up yourself and kill your race? You a hater of your people if you don't want to stay who you are. You shame what God made you. God didn't make no mistake when he made us all like we were.
I think that's a philosophy of despair.
Despair.
I really do.
It ain't no
Yeah?
despair.
I think
Number
this- I
one,
think-
can't no woman. Let me tell you something. Well, I want to tell you. Listen, no woman on this whole earth, not even a black woman in Muslim countries, can please me and cook for me and socialize and talk to me like my American black woman. No woman, and last is a white woman, can really identify with me and my feelings and the way I act and the way I talk. And you can't take no Chinese man and give him no Puerto Rican woman and holler about we in love and you emotionally in love and physically, but really they're not happy because she's gonna hear some Puerto Rican music, he's gonna hear some Chinese music, and they're gonna be clashing all the time. It's just nature.
no, but he brings up some really great points, even though it's not like articulated very well. You know, humans are inherently tribal creatures, and there are
Yes.
certain things beyond, you know, things we can quantify in a G-loaded test that are heritable. There's a reason that the two biggest predictors of whether or not a marriage is going to succeed are, number one, if one of the parties has a severe anxiety disorder, and number two, if the couple is interracial. So,
Predictor of what? Sorry, those two are predictors of what?
of whether or not a relationship is going to be successful, like a marriage is
I
going to be
see.
successful.
Oh boy.
So, all right, on that note, I suppose we'll wrap it up while it's still sort of interesting. Thanks again for watching, guys. We'll have to do this again soon. Thanks again for joining me, B. Williams and Victor.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely.